I'm Ava White, and let me tell you a story. My story. A story that didn't begin with love, but with a lie wrapped in a white silk ribbon. 1 year ago, I was someone else. I believed in hard work, loyalty, and the fairy tale promise that if you gave everything, you'd be chosen, cherished, protected. I walked into my wedding day with a heart full of dreams and a mind sharp enough to forecast market trends but blind to human deceit. I married a man who toasted to forever, while betting $10,000 that I'd say yes. The moment he handed me divorce papers on our honeymoon, everything I thought I knew collapsed like a house of cards. But here's what no one saw coming. I didn't burn. I rebuilt. This isn't a sob story. This is a strategy. I rose from humiliation with nothing but a silver key, a stolen spreadsheet, and the kind of fury that doesn't scream, it calculates. You don't come back from that kind of betrayal as the same woman. You come back sharper, colder, and if you're smart enough, you come back on top. So if you're here for comfort, you won't find it. But if you're here for justice, for revenge served in high heels and boardrooms, then sit tight. Because the bet was his, but the empire? That's mine. I only married you for $10,000. The words slid from his mouth like a punch disguised as a kiss, slicing through the Maldivian breeze and the illusion I still clung to like a desperate woman holding a champagne flute in a sinking yacht. I stood there barefoot on the deck of our overwater villa, white silk robe loose around my shoulders, the faint scent of coconut oil still lingering from the couple's massage we'd had that morning. I remember blinking, wondering if I'd misheard him, if it was a joke, some terrible inside joke I didn't understand. Logan White didn't flinch. He didn't smirk. He laughed. A full-bodied, unapologetic laugh that echoed off the glass panels behind him. God, don't look so shocked, Ava. It was a bet. You were the prize. He tossed the manila envelope onto the outdoor table between us. I didn't need to open it to know it was real. The weight of it, the smugness in his tone, the way he casually checked his Rolex as if I were simply a meeting he had wrapped up. It all told me the truth. The honeymoon was never real. The marriage was a transaction. I was the collateral. You see, he continued, slipping on his sunglasses. The guys didn't think I could do it. Convinced the little up-and-comer on the 47th floor to fall for me. But you made it too easy. You believed every word. My knees didn't buckle, though they wanted to. I kept standing, not for pride, not even for defiance, just numbness. I didn't cry. Not that night. Not even when he rolled his suitcase down the wooden pathway, waving like he'd just wrapped a successful business deal instead of a human life. He left me with the villa, the bill, and the silence. It wasn't until hours later, when the sun had sunk beneath the water and the only sound left was the soft lap of waves, that I finally sat down at the table and opened the envelope. The divorce papers were already signed on his end, dated 3 weeks before our wedding, his signature so familiar, so final, and then, tucked behind the last page, a photograph. A group selfie. Logan and his circle of executives. Men I'd smiled at during our engagement party, raising their glasses in a toast. The caption scribbled in pen, "To Reynolds, 10 grand well earned." It should have broken me, but it didn't. Instead, something strange settled into my chest. Cold, focused, not hatred, not heartbreak. A seed. Of what, I wasn't sure yet, but it was growing fast, roots threading through every piece of who I used to be. The next morning I didn't call home, I didn't scream or drink or send angry emails. I opened my clutch, pulled out a small silver key, the one Cameron Blake, the CFO of Blackwood Global Enterprises, had slipped to me on our wedding day, and stared at it like it held oxygen. A gift, he'd said. Though perhaps not the kind you'd expect. A key to your own office, earned by merit, not marriage. I didn't know why he'd given it to me then. Now I did. By the end of that week, I was on a red-eye back to New York, alone, but not lost. I walked into Blackwood's headquarters with the kind of silence that shakes walls. Elevator to the 47th floor. Swipe. Click. The door opened. Inside, polished floors, a glass desk, a nameplate already in place. Ava White, senior financial strategist. No one expected me back, Logan least of all. But I hadn't come to fall apart. I came to begin again. And this time I wasn't betting on love, I was betting on myself. The moment I sat down at my new desk, something inside me clicked into place. Not like a door opening, but like a lock engaging. Secure. Final. I wasn't the same woman who had walked into that wedding suite in Maldives 7 days ago with masquerade hope and blind belief. That woman had died the minute Logan said the word bet. This woman? She came to win. I powered on the company-issued laptop. The loading icon spun slowly, almost mockingly, as if testing whether I had the nerve to sit here and stay. I did. My hands didn't tremble. My mind was clear, cleaner than it had been in months. Betrayal strips away illusion like acid. What's left behind may sting, but it's real. A few feet away, my old desk still stood unclaimed. The corner where I once nervously reviewed pivot tables and checked Logan's calendar for clues of affection. How pathetic it seemed now, trying to interpret office coffee runs and side glances like they were coded promises. My inbox pinged. Subject line, "Welcome back, Ava Sender, Cameron Blake." The message was short. "Doors open if you need anything," and I mean anything. He didn't sign it, Cameron, just the initial. CB, professional, polished. But the meaning was louder than bold font. I didn't reply. Not yet. Instead, I focused on the file Cameron's assistant had slipped onto my desk. The upcoming strategy brief for Blackwood's Asian expansion. Logan's department had been handling it. The irony was thick. His signature peppered half the draft decks like perfume on cheap silk, showy, overused, and covering something rotten. I flipped through the pages until I found what I didn't even know I was looking for. A name. Project Vegas. It was buried in the notes section of a slide, marked as a legacy initiative. I stared at it, pulse skipping. Vegas, that was the nickname Logan's inner circle used for the bet rolling the dice on love. They once joked at a dinner I'd been too tipsy to decode. Curious, I tapped into the internal server system. My new credentials gave me expanded access. I searched Project Vegas. One result appeared, a shared folder, password protected. Last edited 1 week before our wedding by L. White. My jaw tightened. I wasn't naive enough to try hacking it, not yet. But I copied the metadata, timestamps, access logs, and tucked them into a new folder under my own directory, Reclamation. That's what this was now. Not revenge, not survival. Reclamation. My phone buzzed on the desk. A calendar invite. Weekly strategy meeting. Executive team. 9:00 a.m. tomorrow. Logan would be there. So would I. That night, I didn't go home. Home didn't exist anymore. I stayed late, lights off. My fingers dancing across the keyboard as the city beyond the windows sparkled like a lie told too often. Somewhere in that skyline was a man who thought he'd gotten away with everything. Let him have one more night believing he'd won. At 11:42 p.m., just as I was shutting down my monitor, a new email landed in my inbox. No subject, no signature, just one line of text and an attached audio file. Heem. Didn't just bet on you. I stared at the message. My finger hovered over the play button, breath held in the silence. I clicked. Logan's voice crackled through the static, laughing, loud. Ava was too easy. I could have married 3 of them. Hell, I almost did. Then another voice joined. Cameron's, low, grim. Enough, Logan. But Logan kept laughing. My stomach turned. The file ended. The silence that followed was no longer comforting. It was loaded, wired like a tripwire stretched across a hallway I had already started walking down. I sat there, pulse thudding in my throat, staring at the words again. He didn't just bet on you, and for the first time since Maldives, I felt it. Not fear. Not sadness. Suspicion. Because the only thing worse than betrayal from a lover is betrayal from the one who handed you the key. They thought I'd disappear quietly. They thought I'd resign, relocate, maybe cry into a bottle of wine for a month and vanish from the boardroom radar. Instead, I upgraded my wardrobe and reprogrammed my instincts. When I walked into the executive lounge that morning, the air changed. Not in a dramatic movie score kind of way, but in the subtle tension of a poker table when someone raises the stakes too high for comfort. Heads turned, conversations dipped, and Logan froze for just a second too long before slipping into his polished smirk. "Back so soon?" he asked, standing with his coffee in hand like nothing had happened, like he hadn't turned our wedding into a corporate game night. I smiled, controlled, cool. You know me, I don't waste time. I slid into a booth near the window, setting down my tablet and a copy of the current quarterly report. My presence wasn't about drama. It was about precision, about replacing whispers with results. Logan watched for a moment longer, then turned back to his group. David from marketing, Jenna from risk, the usual suspect. The same inner circle who'd toasted to my humiliation in a beachfront villa. I knew their names, their tendencies, their limits. What they didn't know was that I wasn't playing the same game anymore. I was redesigning the board. Later that morning, I had my first one-on-one meeting with Cameron since the email. I hadn't confronted him yet. I needed clarity, not confrontation, evidence, not speculation. His voice in that audio recording, it had sounded hesitant, disapproving even, but still, he'd been there. He knew something. "Come in," he said when I knocked on his office door, standing before the panoramic view of Manhattan. Like a man born to manage empires, he gestured to the chair across from his. "How are you holding up?" I leaned forward, meeting his gaze. "I'm not here to hold up, Cameron. I'm here to climb." He smiled, not with amusement, something closer to admiration. "Then let's get you everything you need." We discussed the upcoming strategy briefing, the Asian division's performance, missed projections, inefficient resource allocation. It was Logan's territory, which meant I was about to take it apart, piece by piece. "Feel free to rip into anything that doesn't hold up," Cameron said, sliding a flash drive across the desk. "This is raw data from last quarter. Be thorough." I slipped the drive into my leather case without blinking. I always am. As I left his office, I couldn't help but notice a framed photograph on his shelf. A candid shot from last year's leadership retreat, Logan in the center, surrounded by smiling faces. Cameron was slightly off to the side, unsmiling, watching. Even then, he'd been observing, calculating. Back at my office, I plugged in the drive and loaded the data into my analytics dashboard. Within minutes, patterns emerged. Budget misallocations, project overlap, approval logs that didn't match with fiscal strategy plans. I highlighted every inconsistency, noting timestamps, user IDs, and justification memos. By 6:00 p.m., I had built a 37-slide presentation outlining how to save the company over $3 million. 0 cents in one fiscal year. I wasn't just competent, I was dangerous, because I wasn't chasing credit, I was chasing clarity, control. I sent the deck to Cameron with a simple subject line, alternative strategies. Just results. My phone buzzed within 10 minutes. From CB Impressive. "Let's have you lead the next strategy meeting." I stared at the message. Logan always told me I was promising. Cameron was giving me power, and yet that voice in the recording still haunted me. Was he just the better player in a bigger game? The next morning, the executive team gathered around the oval table in the boardroom. I walked in with a sleek black folder and my head held high. Logan did a double take when he saw me heading toward the presentation screen. "Did I miss a memo?" he asked, only half joking. I clicked the remote, lighting up the screen with the first slide. "Yes," I said evenly, "the one where I stopped waiting for permission." Everyone turned toward me. The strategist had arrived. I moved through the strategy presentation with surgical precision. Each slide cut into the facade Logan had built over the past year, carefully exposing inefficiencies, inconsistencies, and missed growth opportunities that no longer went unnoticed. The room grew quieter with each statistic, each graph, each red-line projection I flipped forward. Logan shifted in his chair, jaw tight. I didn't look at him directly. I didn't need to. I could feel the heat rising from his side of the table. The board members, meanwhile, nodded slowly, some surprised, some clearly impressed. Cameron sat at the head of the table, arms folded, face unreadable, but his gaze never left me. By the time I reached the final slide, projected recovery Q4 32% upswing under adjusted allocation, the room was still. I could hear someone's pen click open. Another cleared their throat. "Well," one of the senior partners said, adjusting his glasses, "I suppose we've underestimated the potential of your division, Miss White." I offered a measured smile. That potential existed before. It just hadn't been utilized. I didn't say because Logan made sure it wasn't. I didn't have to. The numbers spoke louder than any accusation. When the meeting ended, the board members filed out with murmured approval. A few gave me side glances that hadn't existed a week ago, no longer seeing me as Logan's ex-wife, but as a contender, a strategist, one of their own. Logan was the last to rise. He lingered behind, expression somewhere between amusement and threat. He stepped closer as I gathered my materials, his voice lowered just enough to keep it private. "Well played," he said, glancing at the screen. "Didn't know you had that in you." I looked up. "That's the difference between you and me. I don't underestimate people I once claimed to love." A flicker passed through his eyes. Regret? Doubt? No, it was irritation. The same expression he used to give junior analysts when they corrected him in meetings. He chuckled. "Enjoy the spotlight while it lasts, Ava. It burns hotter the closer you get to the sun." I leaned forward, my voice cold. "Then you better start investing in sunscreen, Logan, because I'm not moving." I left him standing there, surrounded by the very air he used to own. Now it smelled like something unfamiliar. Fear. Back in my office, a small envelope lay on my desk. No label, no note, just a manila fold the size of a hand, sealed with a brass clasp. Inside, a flash drive. No markings. For a moment, I just stared at it. This wasn't company-issued. No metadata, no tags. Cautiously, I inserted it into my secure offline laptop. One folder. Titled, Duplicates. Inside, 3 audio files. No names, just dates. I clicked on the first one. Logan's voice again, recorded months ago, slurring slightly. "We should start a betting pool for who Cameron's really mentoring these days." Laughter. Another voice. David's. "You think she knows?" "No clue," Logan replied. "She still thinks he's her guardian angel." I stopped the recording. My chest tightened. The second file was worse. It was Cameron, his voice low, measured. "She's a wild card. If she implodes, we contain the fallout. If she survives, well, maybe we found our next CEO." Silence. Then Logan, "You always hedge your bets, don't you?" Cameron didn't reply. I sat back slowly, nausea curling at the edge of my stomach. The third file? I didn't play it. I closed the folder, ejected the drive, and locked it in my filing cabinet. I stared at the skyline outside my window. For weeks, I'd been climbing back, believing that Cameron was different, that the key he gave me meant trust, respect, redemption. But now I wasn't sure what it meant at all. Was I his bet too? Just a longer play, a different angle? I didn't know yet, but I would. Because if there's one thing I learned from Logan, it's that every move in this game is being watched. And the ones pretending to protect you are often the ones holding the match before the fire. They say the truth sets you free, but in my case, it unspooled like a noose, tightening with every revelation I uncovered. I didn't sleep that night. I couldn't. The audio files from the anonymous flash drive replayed in my mind like a haunting melody. Logan's smug drawl, Cameron's unsettling neutrality. My world had already been dismantled once in the Maldives, but this was a different kind of fracture. Subtler, strategic, possibly deeper. By dawn, I was at the office, not because I had work to finish, but because I needed to know. I dug through old internal memos, calendar logs, and performance reviews. My fingers flew over keys like a woman possessed, chasing patterns in the silence of my office, chasing shadows between lines. Why had Cameron sponsored my return? Why had he handed me the key? And more importantly, what did he stand to gain? I pulled up archived emails from the previous fiscal year. One in particular caught my eye. An internal communication between Cameron and HR dated 2 weeks before Logan served me divorce papers. The subject line read, "Succession Planning Contingency Strategy." My pulse quickened. I clicked it open, heart hammering. Most of the email was sanitized, boilerplate language about leadership development. But one line stood out. If MC accepts the terms, we proceed with Phase 2. Her loyalty metrics are strong. Risk acceptable. MC, Ava White, me. It felt like a slap. I leaned back in my chair, air knocked from my lungs. Was I a project to them? A variable in their little equation? I had walked into this company like a wounded lioness, believing I'd carved a path for myself. But now, I wasn't sure if I'd ever really had agency at all. I closed the file and rested my head against the cool glass of the window. Outside, New York pulsed with the quiet power of a city that had seen it all. Ambition. It whispered, "You're not the first. You won't be the last." I didn't want to believe it. Not about Cameron. Not after everything. But denial was a privilege I could no longer afford. At lunch, I met Zoe at a cafe off Lexington, our usual spot when we needed the city to hush long enough for us to breathe. She arrived with wind-blown hair and a to-go bag of cookies I didn't ask for but always appreciated. "You look like hell," she said, sliding into the seat opposite me. "Did Logan crawl out of the sewer again, or is this about Cameron?" I didn't answer right away. I pulled the flash drive from my purse and slid it across the table. "Listen to the second file when you're alone." Zoe's brow furrowed. "What is this?" "Insurance," I said. "Or evidence, I'm not sure yet." She held the drive like it was radioactive. "Jesus, Ava, you're scaring me." I looked her in the eyes. "I'm scaring me." I told her everything, about the emails, the files, the way Cameron spoke about me like I was a pawn. Zoe listened quietly, her cookie untouched, her hand occasionally balling into a fist. "I trusted him," I admitted. "Maybe more than I trusted myself." Zoe's voice was low but firm. "That man gave you a key." But maybe it wasn't a gift. Maybe it was a leash. I blinked hard, tears stinging, not from heartbreak, from rage. Zoe reached across the table and squeezed my hand. "You're not crazy. You're in the middle of a game they never thought you'd learn how to play." I squeezed back. "Then it's time I rewrote the rules." She smirked. "Atta girl." We sat for a long moment, the weight of truth heavy between us, and for the first time in days, I didn't feel alone. I felt ready to tear it all down, systematically, surgically. Because if I was built to be used, underestimated, controlled, then it was time I became something they couldn't predict, someone they couldn't undo. By the time the sun dipped behind the skyline, casting the city in gold and bruised violet, I was sitting across from Cameron Blake in a private room on the 32nd floor of Blackwood Global Enterprises. He had invited me to clarify things, his tone cordial, even warm. As if he sensed the storm beneath my silence, I didn't bother with pleasantries. Why me? He lifted his bourbon glass without sipping, rolling it gently between his fingers. "You're gonna have to be more specific." I placed a printed copy of the HR email on the table between us. He glanced at it, eyebrows barely twitching. "Succession planning?" I said. "Phase 2? Loyalty metrics? Don't play coy." Cameron sighed. Slow, practiced, polished. Ava, you're one of the most capable analysts we've ever had. Logan didn't deserve you. The company saw that. I saw that. Yes, I created a contingency plan. Yes, you were a factor. A factor? I echoed, my voice tightening. You positioned me like a chess piece. I positioned you like a queen, he corrected. Logan was a mistake. A loud, reckless mistake. I made sure you had everything you needed to clean up the fallout and rise. You did, beautifully. And what would have happened if I didn't? I asked, heart hammering. If I hadn't survived the humiliation, if I'd cracked, he set his glass down, finally looking at me, really looking, then that would have told us everything we needed to know. There it was, the ruthless calculus beneath his charm. I could feel the ground shifting under me, not from betrayal this time, but from understanding. This wasn't love. It never had been. This was strategy, efficiency, market returns dressed up in empathy. You played me, I whispered. No, he said evenly, I bet on you. Just like he did. The difference is, I bet you'd win. The room was quiet except for the hum of the city below us. Then he added, more softly, and you did? I stood, leaving the file on the table. You want loyalty, transparency? Fine, but don't mistake my silence for submission again. His lips curved slightly. I never do. Back at my apartment, I couldn't sit still. The air felt thick, like it had secrets. I opened the window, let the wind slap some clarity into me. From my purse, I pulled the flash drive again. Zoe hadn't said anything yet, but I knew she was listening. I knew her silence was brewing. I plugged it into my laptop, replayed the clip of Logan. Then the one of Cameron, but this time I noticed something else. In the background of Cameron's audio, barely audible, was the faint sound of another voice. Female, familiar. I enhanced the audio using basic filters, enough to catch a partial phrase. Can't let her find out. Not yet. I froze. I replayed it. The voice belonged to Veronica White, Logan's sister, the woman who had hugged me at our wedding and whispered, "Welcome to the family," the woman I hadn't seen since the honeymoon disaster. I felt the blood drain from my face. What was she doing in a room with Cameron? And why was she involved in conversations about me? There was only one place to go now, the White estate in Connecticut, where it all began and where it looked like the next phase of this twisted chess game was already underway. As I packed my bag and booked a last-minute train ticket, one thought looped in my mind like a warning bell. If Veronica was part of this, I hadn't just been betrayed by my ex-husband. I had been betrayed by the entire White bloodline. Some houses don't fall in a storm. They rot from within, one secret at a time. The White estate in Greenwich, Connecticut, stood exactly as I remembered it, grand, cold, and draped in pretense. Ivy clung to its stone exterior like it was trying to cover up something foul underneath. Funny how the place that once made me feel small now looked hollow. Hadn't called ahead. I wanted to see their faces when I walked in, unannounced, uninvited, and no longer the quiet, eager daughter-in-law, the butler. A man named Philip, who had worked for the Whites for over 20 years, blinked twice when he saw me. Mrs. White. Miss White, I corrected, brushing past him into the foyer without waiting for permission. The scent of bergamot and polished wood hit me instantly. Same floral arrangements, same chandeliers, but the energy had shifted. There was tension in the walls now, like the house knew something was coming. Not long after, I found Judith White, Logan's mother, in the sunroom, sipping tea and flipping through a fashion magazine like the world hadn't moved since 1996. She looked up at me, her face a mask of indifference sharpened by surprise. "Ava," she said, closing the magazine with a gentle snap. "How brave of you to come back." "Don't worry, Judith, I'm not here for brunch." She smiled tightly, gesturing to the seat across from her. "Then let's not waste time pretending." I sat, folding my hands in my lap. "I'm not here to reopen wounds. I'm here because your daughter, Veronica, is meddling in things she shouldn't. I have reason to believe she's been working with Cameron Blake behind my back." That did it. A flicker of alarm behind Judith's eyes, barely perceptible, but I caught it. "Veronica doesn't answer to you," she said coolly. "No," I replied, "but if she's tampering with confidential company matters or conspiring with my former boss, she might have to answer to federal law." Judith leaned forward. "Are you threatening my family?" I didn't blink. "I'm offering you a chance to tell me the truth before someone else does." She stared at me for a long moment. Then, in a tone that made my skin crawl, she said, "You don't understand what you've walked into, Ava. This family, we protect what's ours." I stood. "That's the problem. You all think I never belonged. But you're wrong. I was a white until you made me a threat." That afternoon, I met Zoe at a coffee shop in town. She looked at me like I'd grown two heads. "You went back to the White estate?" she whispered. I nodded. "Judith's hiding something. I think Veronica is too, but I can't pin it down." Zoe pulled a slim manila envelope from her bag and slid it across the table. "Then maybe this will help." Inside were surveillance photos, Cameron, Veronica, a transfer receipt, all from a private investigator she'd hired on my behalf. One photo made my stomach turn, a document exchange, Cameron handing Veronica a folder labeled Will Gregory White, Logan's late father. "What the hell is this?" I asked, my voice low. "I don't know," Zoe said, "but if they are tampering with Gregory White's will, that's criminal and deeply personal." Something clicked in my head. The inheritance. The shares. The old rumors that Logan was never supposed to inherit the controlling stake. I grabbed Zoe's hand. What if the bet wasn't just about me? What if the marriage was part of something bigger? Her eyes widened. "Like what?" "Like hiding the fact that Logan was never Gregory's rightful heir." I stood abruptly, heart racing. It was time to revisit the one person who might know the truth. Someone the Whites had paid handsomely to disappear. Gregory White's former lawyer. But as I stepped outside, my phone buzzed. A blocked number. One new voicemail. I played it on speaker. Static. Then a clipped, trembling voice. "You don't know what they did, but if you keep digging, Ava, they'll bury you too." I froze on the sidewalk. Zoe stared at me. "What the hell is happening?" she whispered. I looked back at the estate, the legacy, the rot, and whispered, "It's collapsing." The lawyer's office was located in a quiet building on the Upper East Side, tucked between a French bakery and a flower shop, too pristine to be real. Zoe offered to come with me, but I told her no. This part I needed to do alone. Gregory White's estate lawyer, Philip Ellison, had gone dark after the will was executed. Rumors said he'd moved to Florida, or retired to a yacht somewhere in the Keys, but someone forgot to delete his bar license registration, and someone else, me, knew how to cross-section tax filings with quiet little trust firms still paying him advisory fees. He hadn't disappeared. He'd just been told to. When the door opened, he looked older than I remembered. Grayer, thinner, with a tremble in his left hand that he tried to hide. His eyes, though, were sharp and wary. "Ava White," he said, not as a greeting, but a statement. "Just Ava now," I replied. He hesitated, then gestured me inside. "I figured you'd show up someday. I'm only sorry it took me this long." The office was warm, bookshelves, antique desk, no computer in sight. A man who preferred paper, safer, harder to track. I sat, and before I could speak, he poured 2 glasses of scotch. It was 11 in the morning. "Why now?" he asked. "Because someone's trying to erase Gregory White's legacy," I said, "or maybe rewrite it." Ellison didn't answer immediately. He stared into his glass like it might hold a safer version of the truth. "Gregory made me promise to protect one thing," he said eventually. "His final decision, and the reason behind it." I leaned forward. "Did Logan ever know?" Ellison's jaw tensed. Gregory changed his will 6 months before he died, cut Logan out, named a different heir, one that never made it into public record. I froze. Who? Ellison looked at me with something between pity and respect. You. My heart stopped. He was going to give you majority shares. 21%, he said. Said you were the only one in that family who reminded him of himself when he started. Calculated, driven, but not cruel. Then why didn't it happen? Because someone intervened. 3 weeks before his death, a codicil showed up, signed, notarized, undoing the change. I wasn't there. Gregory was in the hospital. Logan and Judith were the only ones with access. My hands were shaking. You're saying the last version of his will might have been forged? I'm saying, Ellison said, voice lowering, Gregory's signature on that codicil isn't the one I knew. I stood, breath caught in my throat. Do you have a copy? He nodded slowly and opened a locked drawer. I kept it because it didn't sit right with me. But if you take this, Ava, you're declaring war. I took the folder from his hand and held his gaze. War was declared the moment they made a bet on my life. I returned to my apartment in Tribeca with the document sealed in my bag and paranoia creeping down my spine. The building's doorman waved, but something in his smile felt forced. My gut twisted. Inside, the apartment was too quiet. I checked the locks. Secure. I moved through the rooms, methodical, calm. Then I found it. A single white envelope taped to my bathroom mirror. No stamp, no handwriting, just a black wax seal. Inside was a photo. Me. At Gregory's grave, from earlier that week, and one sentence typed in courier font. Truth doesn't bring peace, it brings burial. I stared at it until the edges blurred. Then, without knowing why, I opened the medicine cabinet. Every bottle was still there, except the one with my name on it. My prescription. Gone. That's when I knew someone had been in my apartment. And they weren't just watching. They were already inside. Some wars are won in silence, not on battlefields, but behind locked doors with documents, leverage, and the right kind of fear. After the envelope, I stopped sleeping, not because of the threats I could handle. It was the silence afterward that unnerved me. No break-in reports, no security footage, just that photo, that message, and the missing pill bottle. I didn't report it. I couldn't afford attention. Not yet. Instead, I moved quietly, deliberately, like a queen across a chessboard, every step designed to set up the final strike. My first stop, Zoe. We met at her condo in Brooklyn, where the skyline pressed against the windows like an audience. She was already reading when I arrived. Legal pads, tax filings, scanned contract. She didn't ask how I was. She already knew. You're being watched, she said flatly. Possibly tracked, I figured. I ran a sweep of your building's network, she continued. There's a hidden device on your Wi-Fi, likely planted within the last month. I didn't react. Pull it, she looked up. Ava, whoever's behind this, is playing the long game. You don't have time to win clean. I'm not playing clean, I said. I'm playing to end it, she smiled, grim and proud. Together, we went through the fake codicil again. Zoe compared Gregory's signature from old SEC filings with the one Ellison had given me. Not even close, she said. This would never hold in court if you pushed for a handwriting expert. I nodded. I don't want court. I want leverage. Then we need one thing more powerful than signatures. I raised an eyebrow. Video? Zoe nodded. Or audio, anything proving Logan and Judith tampered with Gregory's documents. It sounded impossible, until she pulled up a maintenance log from White House, Gregory's estate, dated 3 weeks before his death. Check this, she said, pointing to a name. Cameron Blake, a junior maintenance tech, fired shortly after Gregory's funeral. No explanation, no severance, no trace. Why does that name sound familiar? I murmured. Zoe smirked. Because he filed a complaint with the labor board 3 months ago. It was quietly settled, but in his statement he claimed he saw Judith entering Gregory's study with a man who looked like Logan after visiting hours. I felt the chill crawl down my spine. And no cameras inside the room. Not in the study, but the hallway. That's another story. Within a day, Zoe pulled the archived server data from the estate's old security contractor. She had connections in all the right or wrong places, and there it was. Grainy, time-stamped, and damning. Judith White wheeling in a mobile document printer, Logan entering 5 minutes later. Both exiting nearly an hour later, Logan holding a sealed envelope. No one else entered before Gregory's nurse returned for the morning shift. My stomach turned. That's enough to blackmail them. Zoe's voice was cold. It's enough to bury them. But I wasn't done. With Zoe's help, I created a private holding company, Ascent Equity Group, through which I started quietly buying back White Industries stock, piece by piece. I found disenfranchised shareholders, former employees, family members, disgusted by Logan's leadership. I didn't tell them who I was. I didn't need to. They just needed a reason to believe he'd fail. By the end of 2 weeks, Ascent Equity held 11.3% of White Industries. Enough to request a formal review of board leadership if backed by 2 more minor shareholders. Zoe looked at me across the conference table we'd borrowed for the meeting. "You're not just aiming for truth," she said. "You're going for the throne." "No," I replied, fingers steepled. "I'm building my own kingdom, on the ashes of theirs." And I meant every word, because for the first time since Logan placed that bet, I was no longer reacting. I was moving first. Zoe always said the devil was in the metadata, and she was right. Again. While she was tracking security footage and email traces, I focused on the human part of the puzzle. Cameron Blake. Fired, silenced, paid off, but not broken. I found him in Queens, working construction under a new name. His shoulders stiffened when I mentioned White House, but he didn't run. That was a start. "I'm not here to get you in trouble," I said. "I want to expose them. You're not the only one they tried to erase." His eyes narrowed. "You're Ava White?" I nodded. He looked away, exhaling. "I knew you'd come back someday. The way they talked about you, like you were a stain they couldn't scrub out." I didn't flinch. I was used to being reduced to a ghost. "What did you see that night?" I asked. He hesitated, so I placed a check on the table, not too big, just enough to say I meant business. He pushed it back. "It's not about money," he said. "It's about fear. They said if I talked, they'd pin Gregory's death on me, said there was footage of me near the meds cabinet, that I could accidentally disappear, too." I stayed silent. "But I've been carrying that weight too long," he continued. "I heard Gregory yelling that night, not arguing, pleading. Then silence. I went back to fix the thermostat the next morning and saw the broken glass, a file drawer open. I knew they'd been in there. Would you testify?" I asked quietly. He stared at me. "If you guarantee my name gets cleared, and you bring them down? Hell yes." That was all I needed. Zoe prepared the affidavit. Cameron signed under oath. We made digital backups, sent encrypted copies to 3 trusted attorneys, just in case it was time to act. I arranged an impromptu board dinner under the guise of family restoration. Logan couldn't resist a good photo op. Judith, ever the PR matriarch, ensured the press would be accidentally waiting nearby. I wore a black silk dress with sleeves long enough to cover the recorder strapped beneath. As the wine poured and the fake toasts began, I let them talk, boasting about legacy, pretending we were one happy empire. Then I raised my glass. "To my brother," I said, smiling sweetly, "and to Judith for all the sacrifices they made, for Gregory's vision." Logan smirked, half drunk on ego. "Glad to see you've come around, Ava." I leaned in. "Oh, I've come all the way around." I slid a flash drive onto the table right next to his glass. Logan frowned. "What's this?" "Your legacy," I said, "on file, in high definition." He laughed, but Judith's face was already pale. She recognized the timestamp on the label. "I've secured votes from 13.7% of White Industries' minority shareholders," I continued. Enough to call for an emergency vote of no confidence. Unless, of course, you'd rather this footage go public. Logan stood up. You're bluffing. I didn't blink. Play it! He reached for the drive, but Judith grabbed his wrist. She's not bluffing, she whispered. She's her father's daughter. The room went quiet, then cold. He sat back down. You'll want to consult with your lawyers, I said. The press will hear about this in 48 hours, unless I choose to delay. For cooperation. No one moved. I stood, collected my coat, and before walking out, turned to face them. Oh, and you might want to check the White Foundation's financials, I added, smiling. Some of your tax filings are outdated. And with that, I left. That night, I watched the city from my hotel balcony, its lights flickering like signals. It wasn't over, but it had begun. Then my phone buzzed. Unknown number. One text. You think you've won, but you forgot who started this game. I stared at the screen. There was an attachment. A photo of my mother, standing beside a man I didn't recognize. Time-stamped 1992. And the man looked exactly like Gregory White, but younger. And nothing about that made sense. They say the dead don't speak, but last night my mother did. The photo had been grainy, clearly from an old analog scan, but I would have known that face anywhere. My mother, Eleanor Wright, with her hand resting gently on the arm of a man I'd never seen before, and yet who bore an uncanny resemblance to Gregory White. I stared at it for hours, each passing minute unraveling a thread I didn't know had been stitched into my story. The timestamp, April 1992, predated my birth by only a few months, which begged the unthinkable. Who was that man? And what did he have to do with me? Zoe came over before sunrise, eyes puffy with sleep but alert the moment I showed her the image. This changes everything, she whispered. I know. We cross-checked public records, hospital logs, and old property deeds. Eleanor's address at the time, a modest studio in Brooklyn Heights. Walking distance from a small clinic that shut down in 1993, we found a name, Thomas Harrington, listed as a volunteer OB/GYN. Then came the breakthrough, a file buried in the digitized archives of the New York Department of Health under a misspelled entry, Ava Cartwright, born December 3, 1992. Mother, Eleanor Wright, no father listed. Cartwright? My name was never White. Zoe turned to me, stunned. They changed your identity? I nodded slowly. And Gregory signed that fake birth certificate to cover it all. It wasn't just a matter of inheritance, it was erasure, a rewrite of origin. I wasn't Logan's sister. I wasn't Judith's blood. I was never supposed to exist as Ava White. And yet, I'd lived their lie better than they had. I felt the floor shift beneath me. The truth had never been about business. It was personal and deeply calculated. But someone knew. Someone had sent me that photo, attached to a number that no longer existed by sunrise. An old burner, perhaps, or someone from Gregory's past seeking justice through me. Either way, it was time to pull the last thread. I requested an emergency session with the board. Logan tried to block it, of course, but with the minority shareholders already leaning in my favor and Judith now desperate for damage control, it went through. The boardroom at White House was colder than I remembered. 12 men and women sat along the long glass table. Judith on one end, Logan across from me, jaw tight. My heart thumped steadily as I laid out the flash drive, a stack of printed affidavits and one sealed manila envelope. The White family, I began, has sold itself as a legacy of vision, charity, and leadership. But what happens behind these walls is a different story. I laid down Zoe's forensic report. showing how Judith laundered donations through shell nonprofits tied to political interests. Then Cameron's sworn statement, detailing Gregory's final weeks and the night he was poisoned. Logan lunged for the documents, but the chairman stopped him. "Sit down, Logan," the old man said. "She has the floor." I slid the final envelope forward. "This," I said, "is my original birth record." A beat passed. "I am not Ava White by birth. I was born Ava Wright. My mother was Eleanor Wright, Gregory's secretary, lover, and the woman this family pushed into silence." I didn't tremble. "I am not the outsider you thought. I am the secret you tried to bury." Gasps rippled through the room. Logan's face went pale. Judith didn't even blink. Her eyes just narrowed slightly, calculating. "You forged a bloodline to maintain control," I said, "and in doing so you destroyed the one thing that could have made us whole." The silence was deafening. Then Judith spoke. Quiet. Crisp. "You think exposing us makes you righteous?" she asked. "No, Ava. It just makes you dangerous." I leaned forward. "Good. You taught me that power isn't inherited, it's taken." The chairman cleared his throat. "We will vote, effective immediately." Logan stood to object, but Judith raised a hand. "Let it happen," she said. As the board began tallying, I stepped into the hallway, pulse steady, gaze fixed. I had told my truth. Whatever came next, it wouldn't be built on a lie. That's when my phone buzzed. Another message, another photo, this time a baby bracelet, name tag, Ava Harrington, and a voice note. Just 4 words. "He's not done yet." The message haunted me all night. He's not done yet. Whoever sent it knew everything. About the birth record, the forged legacy, the poisons, the vote. And now they had something, or someone else, in play. But who was he? Gregory? No. He was already ashes in an urn Judith refused to bury. Logan? Possible. Or was it the man in the photo? The one Eleanor never told me about. I didn't sleep. Couldn't. I sat alone in my apartment, the lights off, the baby bracelet clutched in my palm like a relic from a life I had never lived. Ava Harrington. The name felt foreign on my tongue, and yet it fit. Like it had always been there, waiting to be claimed. By morning, the board had voted. Unanimously. Judith stepped down. Logan was ousted, and I was named interim CEO of White House. Spending a formal review, but I didn't celebrate. I didn't smile, because I knew the storm wasn't over, it was just beginning to crest. The first ripple came from Cameron. He met me at a corner booth in a quiet diner near the East River. No press, no noise, just a man who knew how to handle the dark side of legacy. "There's something you need to see," he said, sliding a manila folder across the table. Inside were medicinal documents. Old, faded, but legitimate. A paternity test conducted in 1993 at the now-defunct Brooklyn Clinic. Subject A, Eleanor Wright. Subject B, Thomas Harrington. Result, 99.99% probability of biological match. Cameron leaned forward, voice low. "He's your father. Eleanor never told anyone. Not Gregory, not even him, apparently. But the test, it's real." I swallowed the truth, slowly. So Gregory hadn't just stolen a child, he had stolen a bloodline. He had raised me under his name, not out of love, but out of control. It was a way to erase a man he hated, to claim me as his only so I could be used. "Where is Thomas now?" I asked. Cameron hesitated. "That's the other part." He slid over another photo. It was a still frame from a recent surveillance camera. A man in his late 50s, graying hair, sharp posture, standing at Gregory's grave. Date stamped 2 nights ago. Thomas was alive, and he had returned. My breath caught. The voice message. "He's not done yet." That wasn't a threat. It was a warning. He wanted something, maybe justice, maybe recognition, or maybe revenge. Cameron looked at me carefully. "You need to meet him, Ava. Before someone else does. I nodded. Later that night, I stood in front of the mirror, dressed in black, no longer mourning anyone, but preparing for a final reckoning. Not with White House, not even with Judith or Logan, but with the truth I had buried just as much as they had. Zoe picked me up. She didn't speak. She didn't need to. She just held my hand briefly at the red light before turning toward a quiet corner of Westchester County, a retirement cottage, small, brick walls, ivy-covered. He was already waiting on the porch. Thomas Harrington. He stood as I stepped out of the car. We stared at each other for what felt like years. He didn't speak first. I did. My name is Ava. Ava Wright. I think you knew my mother. His eyes welled, but he nodded. I never stopped loving her, he said. But I didn't know about you. I believed him. Because the way his voice cracked was the way Gregory's never did. We talked. For hours. About Eleanor, about the clinic, about the day she disappeared from his life with no explanation, and the note he received 3 weeks later. It's better this way. I can't risk them hurting you. She had protected him by vanishing. She had protected me by giving me a new name, and Gregory had made sure none of it would ever come to light. Until now. When I stood to leave, Thomas handed me something. A small cassette tape, labeled, in Eleanor's handwriting, for her when she's ready. I clutched it to my chest. Back in the car, Zoe stared at it with wide eyes. You gonna play it? I nodded. At home, I dusted off my old tape player, dug out from a childhood box I hadn't opened in years. The tape whirred softly. Then her voice. Soft. Steady, like wind through leaves. My darling Ava! If you're hearing this, it means you found your way back to yourself, and now I have one final truth to give you. I leaned in. She continued. It wasn't an accident. What they did to me, what they planned for you, there is one person left. And he was behind it all. My blood froze. She named a name. And it wasn't Logan. It wasn't Judith. It was someone I trusted. Someone who had stood by me this entire time. Cameron. Thanks so much for watching Family and Heart Stories. If this story touched you, please hit the like button and subscribe for more heartfelt dramas every week.